most recently in terms of her educational background from the University of Rochester, where she finished her PhD in cancer education and supervision. She also got her master's from the University of Missouri at Columbia. Yay, Mizzou! For those of you who don't know, I came from there as well. Yay, Mizzou!
She's losing it.
And she did her undergraduate degree at Salisbury University.
Yay, Salisbury!
And where?
Salisbury. Yes, Salisbury.
Okay, is that where you went? Is that really? Well,
I know, right?
why do we need to even have her do this presentation?
She's from Arkansas, so we're just wasting time.
Anyway, she is here to talk to us about, at least in part, a derivative of her doctoral dissertation. And obviously the title of it is Exploring Millennial Generation Counselor Trainee Perceptions of Aging and Their Understanding of Counseling Older Adults. So I guess that for those of us old ones here, this is what she's going to be helping the young ones know how to address us. So,
Thank you,
you're welcome.
and thank you. Thank you very much for welcoming me into your community. Honest. I am presenting findings from my dissertation, findings and the discussion of my dissertation. Just a little bit of background to let you know what kind of compelled me to choose this topic in particular. I was a non-traditional student when I started undergraduate, so I was about 8 years older than most of my peers. And I also, my parents had me later in life, and so my siblings are significantly older than I am, and of course then my parents are older than I am. So I've always had this kind of, I've been surrounded by older adults, and I've also always had an affinity for older adults. I also was unfortunate to have grandparents. They had died by the time I was born. So I never had that kind of influence of having grandparents in my life. So I would always, and I started my undergraduate studies also as a veteran, so I had a certain amount of already kind of life experience. And so I would always kind of pipe up and say in class, in my psychology or sociology classes, and say, well, can we talk more about older adults, or can we focus a little bit more on this area in pertaining to older adults? And my experience, my perception was that there was always this kind of a willful dismissal of discussion about older adults from my peers and my professors, the instructors. That was just my perception. I wasn't sure what to make of it, but that started at the outset of my academic career. I went through each of my degrees, and I kept experiencing this. And I said to myself, I said, what is going on here? You know, what exactly is happening with the conversation revolving around older adults? And so I started deriving my own kind of theories about it, but I said, well, I can't really do anything about this yet to really discover what's going on. It was in my doctoral program at the University of Rochester where I said, you know what, from the outset, I said, I'm going to conduct a qualitative study, and I'm going to really just kind of get to the heart of what is happening with how people perceive older adults. And the way I thought about it, the way that I will understand it, is by simply asking them straightforward questions about how do you perceive aging, how do you perceive your own aging, and then how do you understand counseling of older adults. So that's kind of the background of what it is that compelled me to create this study. Ginger was good enough to pass around a handout of basic questions that I had asked my participants. These are just a sampling of questions, just to kind of get my participants thinking about how they felt about aging and their perceptions of aging and the provision of gerontological counseling. Statement of the problem. Now, in 2012, the Institute of Medicine issued a report titled The Mental Health and Substance Use Workforce for Older Adults in Whose Hands? What they are saying about the aging demographic of the United States is that, hands down, we are facing a silver tsunami. There is an aging boom, and in part because of the baby boomers. What they had found was they surveyed all of the mental health related professions, so social work, psychology, clinical psychology, counseling psychology, counselors in general. And what they found is that in 2012, 1 in 5 older adults had 1 or more mental health and or substance abuse conditions. So this is 1 in 5 older adults age 65 and older. Every day since 2010, 10,000 baby boomers are turning 65 in the United States. By 2029, Older adults will comprise more than 20% of the population, which translates into approximately 79 million Americans age 65 and older. A corresponding increase is predicted in the number of older adults in need of mental health and substance abuse counseling. A conservative figure is 40 million. It's expected to be higher than that. What the report, the Institute of Medicine report, is raising awareness about an issue that demands to increase the workforce of counselors, psychologists, and social workers who are inclined to work with older adults and prepared to work with older adults, because what they have found is that current mental health professionals are not inclined to work with older adults, nor are they prepared to work with older adults. And that's kind of that call to awareness to increase the workforce of mental health professionals who specialize in gero counseling or geropsychology. So that's a statement of the problem. Is I think we are all aware that we're an aging population, but in large part, I don't think we're realizing that we need to do something about it as mental health professionals. So who are the current generations that comprise older adults? And this is according to Strauss and Ho, demographers. Does anyone know of the generations, the oldest generations or persons who comprise older adults? What are they called?
The greatest generation.
Yes, the greatest generation. Which is the one that we're most familiar with?
Baby boomers.
Yes, the boomers. In the middle is the silent generation. And I'll tell you why they are labeled as such. It's because of their cohort and what happened historically in their milieu while they were growing up. But I want to, and I'm going to go through a brief overview of the generations, but as with any grouping or categorizing, there's this kind of element of false accuracy. Within a generation, there's going to be differences in lifestyle and behaviors and values within and between generations. And so what I'm about to provide you, and based on Strauss and Ho's work, is just basically kind of a generalization, but it's not at all meant to be kind of, oh, this is how this generation is. But it serves, it's imprecise, but it will serve as a guideline. So the greatest generation, born between 1901 and 1924, many were children during WW1. Many participated and were victorious during WW2. They experienced the Great Depression and the New Deal initiatives. Many women fought for the right to vote during the suffrage movement. The greatest generation is known for initiating the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts of America, and it really does speak to their sense of service. They are the first generation to experience telephones, movies, those silent films, the black and white films, and radio. And it's historically true that they experienced a systematic institutionalization of segregation enforced by Jim Crow laws. They also experienced the re-education of Native American children, and they also experienced the eugenics movement. So it's all of these things that happened during this historical milieu for this generation. They are, again, motivated by civic values. They have a stoic sense of acceptance and responsibility. Hard workers, dependable and tolerant, cautious, and defenders of the traditional families. They're currently age 90 and older, and that translates to about 5.7 million. Silent generation. Now, the label silent refers to their supposed compliant nature, conformist nature. But after I go through this list, I think you'll see the reason why some may have these qualities or these tendencies. They are the children of the Great Depression and World War II. They fought during the Korean conflict. They are the first generation to divorce in large numbers. They watched The Little Rascals. The Little Rascals, it's great. The Little Rascals was ahead of its time. So here was a show that had African American children. It had female children equal. Not presented as stereotypes, but equal to their white counterparts. It was amazing. This show also kind of represented a beacon of hope for the generation, for the time, because they were enduring the Great Depression as children. So kudos to this. This was the only show at that time that was doing this, so they were ahead of their times. They were exposed to the McCarthyism era This is what might speak to their label, the silent generation, the conformist, the compliant nature. This was a time where thousands of Americans were accused of being communist or communist sympathizers, and they were subjected to really, really aggressive government panels. So this could very well speak to their silent nature. They were scared. No one wanted to be accused of being a communist. And again, they, like members of the greatest generation, witnessed the institution of Jim Crow laws. Sorry. They tend to discuss inclusion process along with maintaining a stoic sense of acceptance and responsibility, much like their parents, the greatest generation. The analogy of the middle child is applied to this generation, and that is they're considered to be sandwiched between kind of an overbearing older sibling, so the greatest generation, with a rebellious younger one, the baby boomers. So they're always they're like the peacemakers. They're always wanting to maintain the peace, and again, this might be indicative of their what happened historically during their while they were growing up. They're currently between the age of 69 and 89 years of age, and that translates to about 40 million Americans. The baby boomer generation, they're born between the period of 1946 and 1964. Again, many did experience the institutionalization of segregation enforced by the Jim Crow laws, while others were born when the Jim Crow laws were found unconstitutional by the passage of the Civil Rights Act. The reason why I'm sharing this, and I keep carrying it through each generation, is because with my study, there's one ism that continues to be perpetuated in our society, and I think it's time for at least the baby boomers to rise up and say, we can't have this continue in our society. But I'll tell you about that towards the end of my presentation. Many were drafted to fight the Vietnam War. Many protested against the Vietnam War. Many were children during the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was a 13-day confrontation in 1962, in which so the Soviet Union and Cuba on one side and the United States on the other were there was a threat of a nuclear conflict. And so that was pretty scary for this generation at that time. They experienced the assassination of President Kennedy, Martin Luther King, and the Kent State Massacre. In 1970, the Ohio National Guard opened fire and shot over 67 rounds and killed 4 unarmed students on campus. So they all experienced these kind of uprisings and participated in movements. Many were countercultural movements. They participated in Woodstock. They participated in the sexual liberation movement, the civil rights movement. So they are known as hardworking, successful. They strive for personal gratification, engages in teamwork, inclusive, strives for health and wellness, optimistic, and very, very, very independent. They went from being hippies to becoming yuppies in the 1980s, and they're currently between the ages of 50 and 78, which translates to about 70 million people. So, the purpose of my study, based on what I had experienced in my, starting out in my academic training, how I've been through kind of maneuvering through academia, working as a clinician, working as an instructor, trying to understand what is going on here. That's one part of this. Of course, this is not what compelled me to write my study, to create my study, but then also based on the numbers that I know are true, I think most of us know are true, based on the concerns explicated by the Institute of Medicine, I decided that using their report compelled me to say, okay, I need to understand how the youngest generation of counselors in training perceives aging and how they understand the counseling of older adults. They are a large generation. We are currently training them to become counselors. It is important to understand how it is that they perceive aging and understand counseling of older adults, because they will inevitably counsel older adults, or at least serve them in some capacity. Although that was not my original, motivating factor, at the end of my study, what I realized is that I am just simply trying to raise awareness about how viable it is an option for counseling students to provide counseling services to older adults. So simply to raise awareness of counseling older adults as a viable option. So who are the millennials? Who's the millennial generation? And this is all according to Strauss and Ho, the term millennial defines a generation of people born after 1982 and up until the late 1990s. At the time of my study in 2012, millennial counselors in training comprised of students between the ages of 18 and 30 years old. The average age of my participants was 24. So what I would like to do, and this is just a short video clip of growing old in a new age, and I think it's a prophetic series. It's from 1996, and what this clip is going to show is, or explain, is why we're living longer, the reasons why we're living longer, and also to realize that the baby boomers are going to be a force. They're not just going to kind of sit back and age gracefully. They are going to command and demand services and to be seen and heard. And so it's really prophetic, but it's also 18 years before the IOM report in 2012. So we've been talking about this, but no one's been listening.
During the 20th century, dramatic changes have taken place in the world population. For example, life
Can you hear?
expectancy has risen steadily in developed nations.
This century, we have in fact increased life expectancy by virtually 50%. It was in the mid-40s, now it's in its mid-70s. So and it's hard for us to realize it, we're the first people in history that basically look forward to a relatively long and certain life.
I think we're now understanding that the aging of the population that includes all of us. We're living longer, and it's no longer a question of academic concern. It's a question of our own vested interest.
In 9 European countries, citizens 60 and older make up more than 20% of the population, compared with about 17% of the population in Japan and the United States. Responsible for the growth of older populations are public health measures, such as sanitation and immunization, which have allowed us to survive infancy and grow to adulthood. Lower birth rates yield a smaller proportion of children in the population, while improved nutrition and lifestyles, high cure rates for infectious diseases, and improved medical care for chronic conditions allow those who reach maturity to live longer.
I think we've reached a point where the older population is itself aging quite rapidly. One of the fastest growing age groups in the older population is indeed the oldest old, the group age 85 and over. And even within that age group, the extreme elderly, those age 90 and over, or centenarians, or a very small number, are going at a faster rate than the oldest old age group itself. The other point that I think is very important to make is the impact of the baby boom, the massive demographic bulge that occurred after the rapid increases after the end of the Second World War. As that group ages over the next 10, 20 years, it's really going to have a massive impact on the demographic structure of the population.
When the baby boom finally matures, reaches old age, I think you might call that the ultimate revenge of the baby boom. They've been the most significant age cohort as an age cohort in America's history. They have driven my life and the life of everyone my age by providing themselves to be students or consumers or whatever else they might choose to be. Now they choose to be senior citizens. Not a quiet generation. They've never been a quiet generation. They will demand rights and probably because of their number be able to get what they want better than any other group of senior citizens.
And so I wanted to share that with you all because, again, this was from 1996, so about 18 years ago, and there have been many reports since, similar to the IOM report. kind of raising the flag and saying, listen, we have got to pay attention to this shift, this demographic shift, and still yet, only in very small segments of our professions has this been kind of adhered and listened to. And it is absolutely time, because it's here. I mean, at the rate of 10,000 Americans every day turning age 65 and older, we have got to pay attention to this. So again, my dissertation was based on two primary questions. And I kind of, in that handout, those questions are kind of listed on there. And what I was looking for, trying to understand, was essentially the social construction of aging and the inequity, the institutionalization of the inequity of aging, how that is internalized in these millennial counselor CITs, counselors in training, how that's internalized and not questioned. So my first question, how do members of the youngest generation of counselors in training perceive aging? That addresses directly, and this is a sociological term, but it's the social construction of aging. How do they perceive aging, the aging of themselves and the aging of others? How do members of the youngest generation of counselors in training understand the counseling of older adults? This question I conceptualize so that I can understand if they are unintentionally perpetuating kind of the inequity that's applied to older adults without thinking about it. My methodology. Participants, a very small qualitative study. I had 8 all-female participants, average age 24 years old. They were either mental health counselors in training or school counselors in training. They were either on practicum or an internship. My data collection and data analyses occurred simultaneously, as does in qualitative research. I had 2 steps to my my dissertation study. The first was focus groups, and the second was individual interviews. I transcribed verbatim first my focus groups transcripts. It was an amazing labor of love. But I went ahead and did that, and then after about a month and a half after that, then I interviewed each participant individually. My data analysis was predicated on the work of qualitative description. Qualitative description provides kind of a way of presenting multiple constructions of knowledge as they are expressed. Literally the words of the participants expressed and captured in a very straightforward descriptive manner, kind of in the vein of the anthropological term rich description. In terms of textual and content analysis, I use the constant comparison, the iterative method of constant comparison, in which I coded and I categorized and I identified major themes and supporting sub-themes. The conceptual framework that I used is critical gerontology, which is an interdisciplinary framework that I first conceptualized my questions and then I analyzed my data. Just a word about critical gerontology. Critical gerontology is an interdisciplinary framework that attempts to reveal how social, biomedical, cultural, political, and economic forces perpetuate the myth that older adults are passive dependents who demands upon our economy create social problems that contribute to the identity, status, and measures of inequity directed towards older adults. It tries, as an interdisciplinary framework, it tries to kind of reveal the unintentional perpetuation of all of these kind of assumptions about older adults. It tries to reveal that through research, and this is across the board transdisciplinary research in sociology, in psychology, in education. So it's a framework used to create the sense of this is what we're studying, but this is in fact what's going on. There's another hidden underlying level of what's going on here. And it also reveals how naturally occurring phenomena are problematized. So in other words, aging, how aging has been commodified. Think about the anti-aging industry, the billions of dollars that are vested in the anti-aging industry. So here are my major findings. Again, these are CIT's perceptions of aging. Please keep in mind that they're all female. They're all young women, average age 24 years old. My first theme, aging was unexplored among millennial CITs. They looked at me like I had 3 legs growing out of my head. They're like, why are you asking me how do I feel about aging or the aging of others? I'm not old yet. They just they hadn't thought about aging in any way, shape, or form. their perceptions, my theme too, perceptions of aging were based on how their family members have aged. Their frame of reference, their default, was to just simply refer to their aging family members, whether it was their parents or grandparents. They lived a very circumscribed life in which they don't have or didn't appear to have exposure to older adults other than the immediate family members. Theme 3, aging is inevitable. Now, this is something that we all know, and we all kind of talk about it in a very indirect way. But what my participants, the data that they provided, all spoke to these kind of the assumption that not everyone ages the same way, which is true, but the assumption that I can control aging in certain aspects of my own aging, and what they were alluding to was the anti-aging industry. It was rich data alluding to, and many times misconceptions about how they can, take a pill, or they can X, Y, and Z, something to control the natural process of aging. I have an exemplar for my theme 4, It's Bad to Be Old. I have 2 sub-themes for this. Older adults value youth over age and their societal pressure to deny aging, getting older. My mom perceives that others, like society, have placed her in this category of not being as attractive or as strong both mentally and physically simply because she's a middle-aged woman. Young people think they don't have to worry about aging because it's not, and this is my providing clarification, the physical signs of aging visible in the moment. And systemically, it's societal because it's bad to be old, and youthful appearance is what older adults should strive for if they want to feel a part of American society. Here is a counselor in training, a mental health counselor in training, who is very, very much honest. She said, my mom has more energy than me. She's about, I think she was 23 years old. She was my youngest one. And she said, but Susan, hands down, my mom has shared with me how she almost feels dismissed in certain circles. And here she's honest. She says, my mother truly does have more energy than I do. But this is how she perceives aging. And it's not that she thinks it's bad to be old, but that society perceives aging as being bad. Aging is limiting. So I found 3 sub-themes emerged: loss of fertility and physical beauty, loss of respect, and loss of physical and cognitive abilities. I have an exemplar of the loss of fertility and physical beauty. I need to, though, provide context for this particular exemplar. This was one of my school counselors in training. She has no desire to counsel older adults, but she fully recognizes that she will have children who have parents who are either older or are being raised by their grandparents. She is also currently working at the University Counseling Center, surrounded primarily by peers of her own age, but also there's a segment of that agency where she's surrounded by older women, and primarily all women work there. So here is her comment, and she shared this, and she was almost very much embarrassed by sharing this, and I'll provide you a little bit more context about it. I have a colleague who's going through menopause early because she had a hysterectomy. I see her having hot flashes, and I can see she feels very uncomfortable. I try not to react when she has a hot flash because it's a normal part of what every woman will go through, except she's going through it young. To provide context for that part of the quote, her peers, the peers of her that are the same age as she was, they were making fun of her. And they were all women, young women, making fun of a woman who's experiencing menopause early and the symptoms of menopause, and they were making fun of her. These are young women who, barring early death, are going to experience menopause. I try to think of what might lessen her discomfort, and really something like what we talked about during the focus group. Her focus group for my dissertation study really focused on death and dying and the hospice and palliative care movement. So something that we talked about during the focus group about normalizing the discussion about dying is what's needed to normalize what happens to women as we age and not make fun of it. I thought her statement was so powerful. And she is my school CIT, who said, and gosh, I'm sitting there and I'm listening to my peers who are my age or younger making fun of a woman who's experiencing the symptoms of menopause. When I think about aging, I think about dying. Aging and dying was analogous for these students. They couldn't extricate one from the other. And I shared with them, I said, you know, we are older a lot longer than we are younger. Aging, you know, becoming an older adult can begin around the age of 45 and can last until well into your 90s. You're older longer than you're younger. And so, but basically their thought was, you start talking about aging, you're gonna die. So there was this very much kind of not a way of understanding aging on the continuum. So the summary, CIT's perceptions of aging, amazing heavy reliance on their own aging family members, a very circumscribed way of living. They weren't exposed, or at least they didn't realize they were being exposed to older adults. Most of their professors were older and are older than they are, but they just didn't make that connection. They feared aging as they described their own perception of how older adults, and again, especially women, were devalued by society, especially after a certain age. They struggled with their own privileged status as young women who knew fully well that they were going to become older adults, older women. They struggled with that. They definitely want a better future for older adults and express a desire for a better future for themselves as they age. So in other words, they want to feel valued and respected when they become elders. There has been a part of that sense of there's this dismissal, this not wanting to talk about counseling older adults. There's been this unexamined assumption that counseling does not work with older adults, that counseling interventions are ineffective with older adults, that older adults are very much resistant to counseling. That's been a myth that's been perpetuated in the mental health profession. I saw literature dated back to the 60s and 50s, and so this has been something that's been very pervasive. Counseling has been shown, empirically shown, that it does work with older adults, that they will seek counseling, that hands down the baby boomers will seek counseling. They don't see it as a stigmatized situation. They will seek help if they need it. Older adults also comprises of not only the civilian population, but also veterans. The prison population is fast aging. So aging is happening all over the place. It's all around us. So we can't be in denial over it. Now, older adults do experience depression, but it is not analogous with aging. Actually, older adults have been surveyed. They're actually happier than persons that are in their 20s and 30s and 40s because they're not as encumbered. So, although they will come in and seek counseling for depression if it's been a lifelong experience for them. Anxiety, the Institute of Medicine report has predicted that the baby boomers will experience a higher level of anxiety simply because they are the first generation that's providing elder care for their aging parents, for the silent generation, en masse. And they are also experiencing the reality of the boomerang generation. So their older adults are coming back home, the older adult children are coming back home for various reasons. And it's not just economic reasons. Some of them just need to return home. And so they're dealing with that reality. So the baby boomers are anticipated to have a very, very high level of anxiety. Many will not be ready to retire at the age of 67. So it's one of those situations in which the baby boomers are going to be competing for jobs against the younger generation, Gen Xers and the millennials. They're going to face ageism and discrimination. I don't know how well they're going to face that because they're not accustomed to having kind of doors closed on them. This is the baby boomer generation that we're talking about. So Alzheimer's disease and related dementia, it goes without saying, it's going to increase phenomenally. It's about 5.6 million now. But with the increase in the baby boomer population, it's going to increase. Substance abuse, as underscored by the Institute of Medicine report, disasters. Hands down, I witnessed it myself when I was in Florida, and I experienced Hurricane Katrina and other hurricanes after that. Older adults are treated differently in terms of evacuation plans and aftercare. Hands down, unless a family member ensures that an older adult is taken care of, or you have persons like myself who will just kind of go around and make sure older adults are okay, they're not. Very, very infrequently are government agencies more concerned about older adults. I saw it in vivo. Financial and interpersonal concerns in retirement and career counseling. A lot of people, older adults, are not going to retire. They're simply going to change careers. Bereavement and suicidal ideation. Now, this is not an exhaustive list, but this is what older adults will come in for counseling for. So, based on that, I wanted to kind of understand, well, tell me how you understand counseling of older adults. All of them, with the exception of one participant, had never thought about counseling older adults. Now, these are master's level students already in practicum, on internship. They'd never thought about it until they participated in my study. I was like guffawed. I'm thinking, how could this be possible? But I'm biased too. So theme 2, counseling older adults is too hard. This theme in particular captures the unintentional perpetuation of this kind of, oh, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Counseling older adults, they resist the idea of counseling. They're not going to come to counseling, so why bother? Counseling interventions, well, they don't really work with old people, so why bother? And I'm using their words as I write these themes. There was this unexamined perpetuation of these stereotypes, these myths. None of those, these are myths. They're not true. But these, my participants unintentionally perpetuated things that probably should have been addressed early on in their careers, but never was. None of these are true. And they assume that counseling is too hard based on these. Now, it's always good to understand clients across the lifespan. The exemplar I'm about to share with you speaks to the nature of a counselor who has no intention of counseling older adults, but knows that she needs foundational knowledge for the following reasons. Working with teenagers, they sometimes have older parents who are living with grandparents. This seems to be a huge thing right now because of the dynamics involved in that kind of relationship. So there's just a lot there, trying to work with that, generational differences, and understand that just because the population I want to work with is A, does not mean I don't have to be aware of population B and C. So there was that awareness that she had, and she had from the very outset of my study. She understood that even though that's older adults is not her population of interest, she still wants that foundational knowledge. Theme 4 is a direct reflection of a compromised curriculum perspective. And what I mean by that is that in this case, the onus falls on the professors, on the instructors, to somehow provide